At my husband's funeral, I sat in my grief, playing the deaf widow. But I heard every cruel whisper. My daughter-in-law, Victoria, plotted to institutionalize me and sell my home, believing my world was silent. I didn't say a word, just smiled a secret smile. You won't believe what happened next. Like, share, and let me know where you're listening from. 5 years ago, my world went utterly silent. It wasn't a gradual fading, but an abrupt, violent cessation, snatched away in the space of a heartbeat after a freak accident. The doctors called it severe inner ear trauma, a complex labyrinth of damage that left me in a profound, isolating, quiet. Life, as I knew it, was over. I learned to read lips, to navigate a world without sound. But the constant, crushing silence was a companion that never left my side. It wasn't just the absence of sound, but the absence of connection, of casual conversation, of the spontaneous joys a hearing world offered. My husband, Richard, became my steadfast anchor, my voice to the world, and my patient interpreter. He learned sign language, became adept at mouthing words slowly for me, and never once showed irritation at my endless questions or the frustrations that came with my condition. But as time wore on, our son, David, and especially his wife, Victoria, began to show the fraying edges of their patience. I could see it in their expressions, the way their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes when I struggled. The barely perceptible sighs before repeating a sentence. Victoria's irritation was particularly transparent, a silent film playing out before me. Her lips would thin into a tight line, her eyes would dart towards David with a sharp, pointed look, her shoulders would slump in a theatrical display of weariness. I couldn't hear her complaints, but her body language spoke volumes, a language of barely contained exasperation. I learned to anticipate the subtle eye rolls, the way she'd tap her fingers impatiently when I asked for clarification, or the quick, tight grimace she'd shoot David's way when she thought I wasn't looking. It was a constant performance of mild suffering, all for my benefit, or rather, for her own sense of being put upon. Richard, however, remained a beacon of unwavering support, his love a constant, gentle current against the rising tide of my despair, even as his own health began its slow, quiet decline. A subtle shortness of breath, a persistent fatigue he tried to hide. His patience with me never faltered. He was my protector, my buffer against the increasing impatience of others, a constant reminder that I was not alone. His gentle hand, his reassuring smile, they were my world. Then, 3 months ago, a strange, almost imperceptible sensation began. A faint ringing, then a fleeting flicker, like a distant whisper just beyond my reach. It was enough to reignite a spark of hope I hadn't realized had dimmed completely. I mentioned it to Richard, and he, ever vigilant, insisted I see a new specialist. That referral led to incredible news, a new, experimental surgery, fraught with risk and uncertainty, but with a tantalizing promise. A chance, however slim, to restore my hearing. The doctor explained the procedure was groundbreaking, involving delicate reconstruction within the damaged inner ear, and while it had shown promising results in trials, there were no guarantees. The decision was immense, the cost was staggering, a substantial portion of our savings, and the outcome was far from assured. Yet, Richard, with that unwavering belief he always had in me, looked into my eyes and simply said, "We do it, Eleanor. We take the chance." His conviction was infectious, his hope stronger than any fear. And so, with a mixture of terror and exhilaration, we decided to proceed. 2 weeks after the intricate procedure, a miracle unfolded. I was sitting by the open window, feeling the cool morning air, when a faint, delicate sound drifted in. A chirp, then another, and another. The world was awakening to me again. One tiny, perfect sound at a time. Birds. I could hear birds singing. The flood of emotion was overwhelming. I sat there, tears streaming down my face, listening to the symphony I thought I'd lost forever. The sounds of the world were back, but in that moment of profound revelation, a strange instinct took hold. I chose to keep it a secret. I didn't know why, not consciously, but a quiet, almost primal urge told me to simply listen, to observe, to hold this precious new gift close to my heart for just a little while longer. 3 weeks later, the world shattered again, this time with a silence that no surgery could mend. Richard, my rock, my voice, my everything, was gone. A sudden, massive heart attack. The grief was a physical weight, crushing and relentless. He had seen me through so much, had championed my healing, and though he never knew the surgery had been a success, I found a sliver of bittersweet comfort in the thought that he had seen the hope in my eyes, that he had lived to see me embark on the path to reclaiming my sound. At Richard's funeral, I played the part of the grieving deaf widow perfectly. My face was a mask of sorrow, my eyes wide and distant, projecting the profound loss that no one believed I could fully comprehend because of my perceived inability to hear the eulogies, the condolences. I sat in the front pew, accepting the hugs and whispered words of comfort, letting my silence speak for me. But as Victoria leaned in close to her friend, Brenda, a woman whose loud, conspiratorial whispers always carried, even to ears that were once dull, I heard her, clear as a bell. "Thank God this is finally over," Victoria whispered, her voice laced with a cold relief that sent a shiver down my spine. Brenda nodded, solemn. Victoria continued, "David's been worried sick about what to do with her." My hands, resting in my lap, clenched imperceptibly. Victoria then launched into her plan, her voice dropping slightly, but every word a sharp, cutting blade. "She can't possibly live alone, Brenda, not in her condition. Richard spoiled her rotten, always doing everything for her. She doesn't understand things are going to be different now." My breath hitched, but my expression remained sorrowful, vacant. Then came the clincher. Richard left everything to David, of course. So, we've already started looking into a nice facility somewhere for Eleanor. We'll sell the house, finally start our real life together. The words hung in the air. A poisonous vapor. My mind raced, trying to process the casual cruelty, the cold calculation. They wanted to institutionalize me, sell my home, and sweep me away as if I were a piece of inconvenient furniture. I sat frozen, a statue of grief, but inside, a storm was brewing. Later, at the graveside, as the casket was lowered, David, usually so pliable to Victoria's will, showed a rare flicker of hesitation. "Mom seemed so lost," he murmured to Victoria, a hint of guilt in his voice. "Maybe we should wait. For a bit, I mean." Victoria turned on him with a sharp, dismissive glare. "Don't be ridiculous, David. She'll adjust. She has to. We can't put our lives on hold forever. Your father understood that." Her voice was chillingly firm, crushing any nascent doubt in David. She invoked Richard's name like a weapon, twisting his memory to suit her agenda. At the post-funeral gathering, back at the house, which was still my house, Victoria was on the phone, her voice carrying across the hushed room. She spoke to someone named Stuart, clearly another relative. "She's barely functioning," Victoria lamented, painting a picture of me as mentally confused. "A burden. Stuart feels guilty. But he knows I'm right. The woman can't even hear a smoke alarm." The final jab, a cruel reminder of my supposed helplessness, intended to justify her heinous plans. But I heard it all, and for the first time in 5 years, the silence wasn't in my ears, but in my soul, a terrifying calm before the storm. The funeral reception wound down, the last of the mourners departing with their hollow condolences and awkward pats. I managed to maintain my facade of the frail, grieving widow until the door clicked shut behind the final guest. Then, the weight of the day, and the crushing burden of Victoria's overheard words, became too much. I retreated to the sanctuary of my bedroom, the heavy oak door, a temporary barrier against the betrayal blooming downstairs. But the old house, with its thin floors and familiar creaks, offered no true escape from sound. I heard David and Victoria's voices drift up from the living room below, an insidious hum that pierced the quiet of my feigned deafness. I pressed my ear against the floor, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "She just seems so lost." David's voice, tinged with genuine sadness, floated up. "Maybe we should give her a little more time to grieve." This is all happening so fast. Time won't change the facts. David. Victoria's response was sharp, devoid of empathy. Your father knew this day would come. That's why he made sure you'd inherit everything. He trusted you to make the right decisions for your mother, to protect her, now that he's gone. Her words were a carefully crafted lie, designed to twist Richard's foresight into a weapon against me. There was a pause, and then a chilling sound. Victoria's light, casual laugh. Do you honestly think she wouldn't want to leave this house? Come on. She'll go where we tell her to go, and she'll be grateful for it. She has no concept of what it takes to manage all this. It's for her own good, David. My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity, the callous certainty in her voice, it struck me then, with a force that stole my breath. They truly believed Richard had disinherited me, had left everything to David, effectively rendering me powerless, a mere burden to be managed. They were planning my entire future without a single thought for my consent, treating me like a senile child incapable of making my own decisions. The rage began to simmer, a low, dangerous heat beneath the surface of my practiced composure. The next morning, the house was quiet except for the faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen. I crept silently to the top of the stairs, my movements precise, hushed. Peeking over the banister, I saw Victoria in the kitchen, casually perched on a stool, phone pressed to her ear. She was talking to someone, her voice carrying clearly in the morning stillness. Yes, that's right. She cooed into the phone, her tone sickeningly sweet, laced with an artificial concern. Eleanor is doing as well as can be expected, I suppose, but she's just more confused every day. Doesn't respond when people talk to her, just stares off into space. Seems lost most of the time, really. It's quite heartbreaking. A wave of nausea washed over me. The lies, so effortlessly spun, were designed to create a narrative of my complete incompetence, justifying whatever drastic measures she had in mind. She paused, listening, then continued. Oh, David agrees completely, of course. He's just emotional right now, you know. It's his mother. But he understands the practicalities. We're thinking something like Sunset Manor. They have wonderful facilities, excellent care. Sunset Manor. An assisted living facility. The name itself felt like a death knell. She was already shopping for my confinement. She doesn't really have a choice, to be honest, Victoria declared, her voice dropping slightly, becoming conspiratorial. Richard left everything to David precisely because he knew she couldn't handle the responsibility of the estate. He was always so protective, bless his heart. My jaw tightened. Richard had left everything to David? The lie was outrageous. For decades, it had been me, Eleanor, who managed the household finances, paid the bills, balanced the books, even handled some of the accounting for Richard's pharmacy. Richard was brilliant with people and his medical knowledge, but numbers were my domain. He'd often joked that he wouldn't know a debit from a credit if it weren't for me. Victoria's assertion was not just a falsehood. It was a deliberate erasure of my entire adult life's contribution. A profound insult to my intelligence and capabilities. Just then, David entered the kitchen, his morning hair rumpled, a somber look on his face. Morning, he mumbled, pouring himself coffee. I was thinking, maybe we should start going through Dad's papers today. There must be a lot. Victoria looked up, a calculated smile touching her lips. Mr. Davis, the lawyer, said we should wait until after the reading of the will, dear. But that's just a formality, really. He just needs to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. Her dismissive tone implied the will's contents were already known, already settled. David hesitated. Shouldn't we talk to Mom about it first? About everything? Victoria sighed, a sound of weary patience. David. Honestly, what would we even say? Mom, we need to discuss estate management, property taxes, investments. She wouldn't understand a word of it. Your father sheltered her from all of that her entire adult life. He just wanted her to be comfortable, happy, to focus on her gardening and her books. She made my interests sound like trivial pastimes for a simple-minded woman. But, David began, still looking conflicted. Besides, Victoria cut him off smoothly, her voice gaining momentum. Think about her, David. Alone in this big house? Who would look after her? Who would make sure she's eating? Who would respond if there was an emergency? She'd be isolated, vulnerable. Sunset Manor is a beautiful place. They have activities, nurses, friends her own age. It's what your father would have wanted for her, I'm certain. And the house? David asked, his gaze sweeping around the familiar kitchen, perhaps seeing it through Victoria's mercenary eyes. Victoria practically beamed. Oh, the house will sell quickly, darling. Prime location. It'll fetch a very good price, more than enough to cover her care for years and still leave us with a substantial amount left over for our own future. Think of it, David. We can finally start that renovation on our own place. Get that new car you've always wanted. I listened, my stomach churning. My needs, my comfort, my very existence were nothing more than an inconvenience to be calculated and minimized. My home, the repository of decades of memories with Richard, was merely a commodity to be cashed in for their selfish desires. Your father actually tried to talk to you about his concerns for her, remember? Victoria pressed, turning to David with an earnest expression, clearly attempting to manipulate his memory. That conversation you two had last year, about what would happen if he wasn't around, he wanted you to promise you'd look after her, that you'd make sure she was safe and cared for, even if it meant making difficult choices. David frowned, trying to recall. He did say something about making sure she was taken care of. But he didn't mean. Victoria patted his arm, a patronizing gesture. He meant exactly what I'm saying, David. He loved your mother, but he was realistic. He knew she couldn't cope alone. He trusted you to be strong enough to do what was necessary. I stood there, unseen and unheard, a ghost in my own home, listening to the intricate web of lies Victoria was weaving, not just for David, but for anyone who would listen. But this ghost had ears now, and this ghost was far from helpless. Victoria's voice drifted up, a chilling drone of self-justification. Look, David. We're doing what's best for everyone. For your mother, yes, but also for us, for our future. We want to start our own family, remember? We can't do that with a constant shadow hanging over us, a never-ending responsibility. David's response was a mournful sigh. I know, Vic. It's just... She seems so small and lost without Dad. It breaks my heart. Exactly. Victoria pounced on his wavering. That's why she needs professional care, David. We can't be expected to provide round-the-clock supervision. We have lives to live, dreams to pursue. Your father would have wanted us to be happy. The hypocrisy of her words was a bitter taste in my mouth. She twisted every sentiment, every truth, to fit her avaricious agenda. I couldn't listen anymore. My heart pounded with a mixture of raw grief for Richard and incandescent rage at their betrayal. Their confidence, their casual dismissal of my personhood, fueled a fire within me. I retreated fully to my bedroom, the anger a hard, bright knot in my chest. They were so sure, so absolutely certain of their entitlement, of my helplessness. But they were wrong. So terribly wrong. I locked my bedroom door, something I hadn't done in years. My eyes fell on Richard's old mahogany desk, a sturdy piece that had been in his family for generations. I walked over, my movements deliberate, my mind clearing with a sudden, sharp focus. He had a small, fireproof safe, hidden behind a loose panel in the desk's ornate carving, a relic from his father's time. Rarely used, but always there. I had forgotten about it until now. My fingers traced the faded numbers on the dial. The combination. It came to me instantly. A memory as clear as the day itself. Our wedding date. The day we promised, forever. I turned the dial, the clicks echoing loudly in the sudden silence of the room. The latch sprang open with a soft thud. Inside, nestled amongst a few old photographs and Richard's father's war medals, was a manila envelope. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled it out. Scrawled across the front in Richard's familiar hand were the words, Last Will and Testament, Richard Matthews, original. Below it, a date. Updated 3 months prior to passing. 3 months ago. That was precisely when I'd had my hearing surgery. A shiver ran down my spine. I tore open the seal and unfolded the crisp, legal paper. My eyes scanned the dense paragraphs, my heart racing. Victoria's smug certainty had painted a picture of me being disinherited, left with nothing but their grudging charity. But Richard, my brilliant, protective Richard, had been one step ahead. The will explicitly stated, in clear, unambiguous terms, that everything, the house, our joint savings, his life insurance policies, his retirement funds, everything was bequeathed solely to me, Eleanor Matthews. Every single asset, every penny, was mine. And then, I saw the paragraphs that truly revealed Richard's foresight, his unwavering trust in me, and his deep suspicion of others. He had insisted on specific, potent language. I am of sound mind, the will read, and have observed that my wife, Eleanor Matthews, remains mentally competent and capable of managing her own affairs despite her hearing impairment. Her ability to comprehend and engage with complex matters has not diminished. It was a direct rebuttal to Victoria's insidious claims. My eyes blurred with tears, but I forced myself to keep reading. The next sentence was a legal shield, a bulwark against their avarice. Any attempt to declare her incompetent or to place her in institutional care against her will should be viewed as contrary to my wishes and potentially fraudulent. Richard. He knew. He had seen Victoria's subtle shifts, her growing impatience. Even before I could fully articulate them, he had suspected their motives and, in his boundless love, had protected me financially and legally, crafting a document that would render their schemes utterly moot. He had not only ensured my financial security but had also armed me with the legal means to fight them. Then I saw the provision for David. My son. There it was, in stark black and white. Richard had bequeathed a sum of $50,000 to David, a generous amount. A final gift from a loving father. But the following clause made my breath catch. Should my son, David Matthews, challenge this will or attempt, by any means, to declare his mother, Eleanor Matthews, incompetent, or to place her in institutional care against her expressed wishes, his inheritance shall be reduced to a token sum of $1, with the remainder being donated to the local deaf and hard of hearing charity of Eleanor's choosing. Richard hadn't just protected me, he had given David a stark choice: respect his mother's autonomy and his father's wishes, or lose almost everything he stood to gain. He had provided an incentive for David to do the right thing, to stand by me, while also putting a severe penalty on any attempt to collude with Victoria's schemes. I gently folded the will, the paper feeling heavy with Richard's enduring love and clever strategy. I placed it back in the manila envelope, sealed it, and returned it to the safe, clicking the lock into place. My hands were no longer trembling. A profound sense of calm settled over me, replacing the earlier storm of grief and rage. They could plan all they wanted. They could dream of selling my home, of spending my money, of moving me into Sunset Manor. But they were planning for money that would never be theirs, a future that would never come to pass. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. I anticipated the formal will reading with a newfound, steely resolve. Victoria expected a formality, a rubber stamp on her cruel designs. Instead, she would face Richard's true intentions, laid bare for all to see. And this time, I would not be silent. The day of the will reading dawned crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the emotional turmoil churning within me. This wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was going to be my performance of a lifetime. I had to continue playing the part of the deaf, helpless widow, the vulnerable woman Victoria believed me to be. Every gesture, every expression, had to be perfect. I chose Richard's favorite blue dress, a soft wool crepe that now felt too large on my suddenly thinner frame. I deliberately made my complexion paler, leaving off my usual blush, allowing the shadows under my eyes to deepen. I wanted to appear fragile, smaller, easily overwhelmed. It was a calculated transformation, designed to elicit pity and reinforce their preconceived notions of my incapacitation. Soon, I heard the familiar crunch of tires on the gravel drive. David had arrived to pick me up. As he came through the front door, I caught Victoria's voice, a low hiss of instruction. Remember, Let me do most of the talking. Your mother gets confused easily, and we don't want her signing anything she doesn't understand." The casual dismissal of my intelligence stung, but I let it wash over me. Their overconfidence would be their undoing. David appeared in the doorway of my bedroom, his expression still tinged with a sad, gentle concern that I knew was genuine, however misguided. He moved his lips slowly, enunciating each word for my benefit. "Time to go, Mom." "Lawyer." I nodded, my gaze fixed on his mouth, feigning understanding. I picked up my purse, a sensible leather bag I'd carried for years. Hidden deep inside, nestled among tissues and a forgotten lipstick, was the small digital recorder Richard had given me years ago, a thoughtful gift for capturing lectures or important notes. It was on, quietly documenting every word. The drive to Robert Bob Davis's office was largely silent, at least from my perspective. David navigated the familiar streets, glancing at me occasionally with a worried frown, but the silence was broken by Victoria's hushed whispers, barely audible over the hum of the engine, yet perfectly clear to my newly restored ears. "Just be careful, David. Don't let her sign anything without reading it first. We don't want any surprises." Her tone was laced with a patronizing protectiveness that felt like a slap. Little did she know, the biggest surprise of her life was waiting for her. We arrived at the law office, a quiet, stately building on Main Street. Robert Bob Davis, a man whose kind eyes had often held a gentle, professional pity for me since my hearing loss, met us at the reception area. He offered a sympathetic nod, a brief, solemn handshake. "Eleanor." He mouthed slowly, his brow furrowed with what I now recognized as genuine compassion. I offered him a faint, sad smile, my head tilted slightly, as if straining to catch a vibration of sound. My performance was flawless. He led us into a quiet conference room, dominated by a large, polished table. We took our seats, David beside me, Victoria opposite. Her posture rigid, a predatory glint in her eyes. Bob Davis settled into his chair, a stack of folders before him. He opened one, then another, his gaze flicking between them, a slight frown creasing his brow. He cleared his throat, a hesitant sound. "This is unusual," he murmured. More to himself than to us. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over David and Victoria, then resting briefly, almost apologetically, on me. "I have 2 different wills here from your father, Richard." Victoria stiffened, leaning forward in her seat, her perfectly composed mask cracking. "2 wills?" she interjected, her voice sharp with astonishment. "What do you mean, Mr. Davis?" Bob Davis adjusted his glasses, a slow, deliberate gesture. "Well, there's the will we prepared for Richard last year. A standard document, and then there's a more recent document, dated exactly 3 months ago. It explicitly states it supersedes the earlier version." David frowned, a genuine bewilderment clouding his face. 3 months ago? Dad never mentioned updating his will. Not to me, anyway. He looked at Victoria, who simply shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Bob Davis's expression grew more serious. "The provisions in this newer document are quite different from what we originally discussed with Richard." He paused, as if gathering his thoughts, preparing for an unpleasant task. Victoria's voice, now undeniably sharp, cut through the quiet. "Different how, Mr. Davis? What could possibly be different?" Her casual contempt for my presence had vanished, replaced by an edgy apprehension. The control she thought she had was slipping. Bob Davis cleared his throat again, a nervous tremor in the sound. He picked up the more recent document, his eyes scanning the first paragraph. He looked up at us, his gaze lingering on Victoria for a fraction of a second longer than on David, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes. Then he began to read, his voice clear and formal, echoing the words Richard had carefully chosen. "I, Richard James Matthews, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous wills and testaments." The first blow landed. I watched Victoria's eyes narrow, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the edge of the table. The game was about to begin, and I, the silent, deaf spectator, was ready for the show. The revelation of Richard's secret will is about to shatter their illusions. What happens when Victoria's carefully constructed world crumbles? Will David finally see the truth, or will he side with his greedy wife? Don't miss a single moment of this unfolding drama. Hit like, share this story, and subscribe for more unforgettable tales. Let's dive back in. Robert Bob Davis continued to read, his voice steady, formal, as he recited the standard legal boilerplate. My gaze was fixed on Victoria. Her initial shock had faded, replaced by a smug, confident expression. She was clearly anticipating the next section, the one she believed would confirm David as the primary beneficiary, the rightful heir to all Richard's assets. Her lips were pursed in a thin, self-satisfied smile, her eyes sparkling with greed. She was mentally counting her chickens, planning her renovations, her new car, her real life. Then, Bob Davis reached the crucial passage, the words Richard had so carefully crafted to protect me and unveil their true intentions. His voice, which had been a monotone, now carried a subtle, almost imperceptible emphasis. I leave my entire estate, he read, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting second, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths, including my home at 1247 Elm Street, all bank accounts, investments, life insurance proceeds, and personal property to my beloved wife, Eleanor Matthews. The words hung in the air, a bell tolling the death of Victoria's carefully constructed future. The room descended into a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. Victoria's smug smile evaporated, her mouth dropping open in a perfect O of astonishment. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted to David, who simply blinked, his own face a mask of utter confusion. The color drained from Victoria's face, leaving it ashen. It was Victoria who finally broke the suffocating quiet, her voice a strained, high-pitched squeak. There must be some mistake, she stammered, scrambling for purchase in the suddenly shifting ground beneath her feet. Richard told us, we understood that David would inherit the house and primary assets. He always said, her voice trailed off. The conviction replaced by a desperate, pleading tone. Bob Davis slowly shook his head, his expression impassive. The will is very clear, Mrs. Matthews, and, he added, his voice hardening slightly as he looked directly at Victoria, there's more. He then proceeded to read the competency clause, the legal shield Richard had so cleverly woven into the fabric of the document. I have observed that my wife, Eleanor Matthews, remains mentally competent and fully capable of managing her own affairs despite her hearing impairment. Any attempt to declare her incompetent or to place her in institutional care against her will should be viewed as contrary to my intentions and potentially actionable. Victoria's face, already pale, now turned a ghastly white. Her eyes darted from Bob Davis to me, a flash of fear mingling with her disbelief. This is impossible, she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Richard knew Eleanor couldn't handle financial responsibilities. She's deaf, for God's sake. How could she manage anything? Her voice rose, laced with a frantic edge, betraying her panic. Bob Davis calmly ignored her outburst, his gaze unwavering as he continued reading. Next came David's provision, the crucial clause designed to test his loyalty. To my son, David Matthews, I bequeath the sum of $50,000, contingent upon his respect for his mother's autonomy and her right to live independently as she chooses. Should he challenge this will, or attempt by any means to declare his mother incompetent, or to place her in institutional care against her expressed wishes, this bequest shall be reduced to a token sum of $1, with the remainder being donated to the local deaf and hard of hearing charity of Eleanor's choosing. The room fell silent once more, a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. I could almost hear the frantic whirring of Victoria's mind, calculating the implications, the sudden, devastating loss of her imagined fortune. David, meanwhile, looked utterly shell-shocked. His head slowly turned to me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and a nascent horror. I don't understand, David finally said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Dad never said anything about this to me. Never. Bob Davis closed the will document, placing it neatly on the table. Richard came to my office privately, approximately 3 months ago, he explained, his voice low and measured. He was very clear about his intentions. He wanted to ensure Eleanor was fully protected and had the means to live independently, in her own home, for as long as she desired. He made specific arrangements for her financial security and, as you've heard, included very explicit language regarding her competency. Victoria, though clearly reeling, quickly found her footing, her survival instincts kicking in. "But she can't live alone," she insisted, her voice strained, a desperate plea. "She's deaf. What if there's an emergency? A fire? How would she hear a smoke alarm?" She gestured wildly in my direction, portraying me as a helpless victim of my disability. Bob Davis turned to me then, his expression gentle. "Eleanor," he articulated slowly, carefully mouthing the words. "Do you understand what has been read?" I maintained my act, tilting my head slightly, my brow furrowed in a confused, wistful expression. I looked at him, then at David, then back at him, my eyes wide and seemingly uncomprehending. David, ever protective, albeit misguided, quickly jumped in. "She doesn't understand, Mr. Davis," he said, shaking his head. "Look at her. She's clearly confused. Perhaps we should arrange for a competency evaluation. For her own safety, of course." Victoria nodded vigorously, her eyes gleaming with a renewed, desperate hope. This was her angle, her last-ditch effort to salvage her plans. Bob Davis, however, frowned deeply, his kind eyes now holding a stern resolve. "David," he said, his voice firm, "as I just read, Richard included very specific language in this will to prevent such evaluations. He expressly stated that any attempt to declare his wife incompetent would be considered contrary to his wishes and potentially fraudulent. He was very clear that Eleanor is fully capable of managing her own affairs." He paused, letting his words sink in. He foresaw this possibility, and he made sure to address it. The air crackled with tension. Victoria's face was a study in defeated fury. The legal net Richard had cast was closing in. Victoria's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching visibly in her temple. The carefully constructed edifice of her plans had not just crumbled. It had been utterly demolished by Richard's foresight. She understood, in that moment, that Richard had completely outmaneuvered her, anticipating her every move, blocking every avenue of attack. The shock on her face slowly morphed into a simmering fury, a silent rage that radiated across the room. David, still reeling, finally broke the heavy silence. "What happens now?" he asked Bob Davis, his voice small. Bob Davis turned to me, his expression once again gentle. "Eleanor, you take immediate possession of all assets listed in the will. The house, the bank accounts, everything. The estate is yours." Victoria tried one last, desperate angle. "Surely there's a waiting period, Mr. Davis? Some kind of probate? It can't be immediate, can it?" Bob Davis shook his head, patient but firm. "Mrs. Matthews is the legal owner of these assets, as of her husband's death. There is a probate process, of course, but for all practical purposes, her ownership is already established." He then reached across the table, handing me a thick folder filled with documents. "This contains all the necessary paperwork, Eleanor. I'll be in touch to help you with the transfer of titles and accounts. Please don't hesitate to call if you have any questions." I took the folder, clutching it tightly to my chest, my face carefully molded into the bewildered, elderly woman they expected. I gave Bob Davis a shaky, grateful smile, my eyes wide and seemingly lost. My internal smile, however, was sharp and victorious. The drive home was a cauldron of unspoken tension. Victoria sat rigid in the passenger seat, her anger a palpable force that filled the car. David, on the other hand, seemed genuinely bewildered, his brows furrowed in thought, glancing at me occasionally with a perplexed expression. He hadn't yet reconciled the Richard he thought he knew with the man who had authored this unexpected will. "He just didn't tell us the truth," Victoria muttered, her voice tight with resentment. "The question is why?" She paused, then offered a new rationalization, twisting the facts to suit her narrative. Maybe he couldn't have known how much worse Eleanor's condition would get, how much more fragile she'd become. He was trying to protect her, but he put her in a very vulnerable position now. She turned to David, her eyes glittering with a new, dark resolve. We adapt, she declared, her voice grim. We find another way to help her. For her own good. We can't let her be exploited. Back at the house, I retreated to my room again, leaving them in the living room below. The thin floors were once more my unwitting allies. This changes everything, I heard Victoria tell David, her voice low and intense. She's sitting on $4 million in assets, David. And she doesn't even understand what that means. She'll be a target for every scam artist and predator out there. Her voice dropped further, a chillingly manipulative tone. No, we have to protect her. We move in here. Temporarily. Of course, just to help her adjust, make sure she's not taken advantage of. A cold chill snaked down my spine. Their new plan. If they couldn't simply take the money outright, they would control me directly. They would become my caretakers and protectors, weaving themselves into every aspect of my life, effectively locking me in my own home, a prisoner in plain sight. They would manage my finances, control my decisions, and eventually, no doubt, find a way to bleed my inheritance dry. True to her word, Victoria orchestrated their move-in with military precision. She was already barking orders at David, who seemed too stunned to resist. Go pack some essentials, David, and put our things in the master bedroom, obviously. Your mother can move to the smaller room down the hall. She won't need all that space now, and it's closer to the bathroom for her. I came downstairs a few hours later, feigning a confused disorientation, to find them already rearranging furniture in the living room. Boxes of their belongings were stacked near the staircase. Victoria looked up, forcing a bright, brittle smile. Oh, Eleanor, dear. Good, you're up. We decided to stay here for a while, just to help you adjust. You know, with everything. We wouldn't want you to be lonely. Her words were saccharine, but her eyes held a possessive glint that was anything but kind. Over the next few days, Victoria systematically began to take control of the house. The kitchen, my domain for decades, was rearranged to her liking. My carefully organized spice rack was dismantled. My favorite dishes relegated to the back of the cupboards. Photos of Richard and me were moved, replaced by framed pictures of David and Victoria. A new, garish vase appeared on the mantelpiece, replacing a delicate ceramic piece I cherished. Each change was a subtle act of erasure, a territorial marking, asserting her dominance. Then came the mail. Victoria began intercepting it, feigning concern over bills and financial statements. Oh, Eleanor, don't you worry your head about these, she'd say, waving an envelope dismissively. Stuart and I will take care of everything. We'll make sure all the important things are paid on time. You just focus on relaxing. Her tone was condescending, treating me like a child, unable to grasp basic adult responsibilities. I also overheard her making a flurry of phone calls. She was fishing, as Richard would have called it, for ways to gain control over my inheritance. I heard her speaking to banks, to lawyers other than Bob Davis, and to various financial advisors, carefully constructing a narrative of my supposed mental decline. Most chillingly, I heard her speaking to someone named Dr. Susan Kelly, painting a picture of me as increasingly disoriented, forgetful, and utterly incapable of managing my vast new fortune. She was building a case for my incompetency, brick by insidious brick, right under my very nose. But I was listening. And for every brick she laid, I was silently gathering my own, preparing to build a wall of my own. The days blurred into a suffocating routine, each one a fresh installment in Victoria's campaign to undermine my sanity and secure my fortune. I sat, outwardly placid and seemingly oblivious, while Victoria moved around me like a predator. Her movements calculated, her voice a soothing lie designed to mask her true intentions. One afternoon, I heard her on the phone, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper, but every word crystal clear to my newly returned hearing. She was speaking to Dr. Susan Kelly, the general practitioner Richard and I had seen for years. Yes, Dr. Kelly, it's Victoria, she began, her tone laced with manufactured concern. I'm calling about Eleanor. Her behavior has become increasingly worrying since Richard passed. She's so withdrawn, confused, doesn't respond appropriately to questions. Just yesterday, I found her standing in her nightgown at 3 in the morning, completely disoriented, just staring into space. The lie was so audacious, so utterly fabricated, that a gasp almost escaped my lips. I remembered that night perfectly. I had simply gone to the kitchen for a glass of water, and Victoria, ever lurking, had caught me. I had simply turned and gone back to bed, playing the confused widow. "I really think she needs a cognitive evaluation," Victoria pressed, her voice urgent. "The deafness is definitely part of the problem. But it's more than that. She seems to be losing touch with reality. We're so concerned for her safety." I retreated to my small bedroom, the one they had unceremoniously moved me into, my heart pounding with a furious rhythm. Rage, pure and unadulterated, surged through me. She was systematically building a case, brick by insidious brick, for my incompetency. Later that evening, Victoria was on the phone again, this time with her friend Brenda. Her voice animated, almost giddy. She was exaggerating my supposed rapid deterioration, painting a picture of a senile old woman losing her mind. And then, she revealed the true value of Richard's estate, savoring the number like a delicious secret. "So, the plan is," Victoria whispered, her voice bubbling with excitement. "If she's declared incompetent, David would become her legal guardian. Then we could make decisions in her best interest. You know, sell this big house. It's far too much for her, really. Invest the money properly. Get her into a nice, safe facility." She paused, then added, "The timing is actually perfect, Brenda. You know we've been trying to have a baby, and these fertility treatments are outrageously expensive, and David just got that promotion. So, things are really looking up. This inheritance would be a huge help. Her plans, her fertility, David's career, all hinged on my supposed mental decline and their ability to seize my fortune." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "She won't fight it, Brenda. How could she? She can't even hear what we're saying about her." The next morning, Victoria arrived at my bedroom door with a manufactured cheerfulness that set my teeth on edge. "Good news, Eleanor dear," she exclaimed, her smile wide and artificial. "I've arranged for a wonderful geriatric specialist, Dr. Lena Kim, to visit this afternoon. Just a routine checkup, to make sure you're adjusting well." David, bless his naive heart, looked uncomfortable. "Maybe we should wait, Vic. Mom might not like a stranger coming in." Victoria waved his concerns away with a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, David. The sooner we establish a baseline, the better we can track any changes. It's for her own good, and she doesn't understand what an evaluation is. We're her family. We know what's best." I feigned a mild confusion, a little nod, and excused myself to my small room. Once inside, I retrieved the digital recorder from my purse. I pressed play, listening to the hours of incriminating conversations, the carefully documented lies and manipulations that had been so generously provided by Victoria herself. It was all there, a mountain of evidence. My fingers brushed against something else in my purse, something thin and crisp. Another sealed envelope. Richard's handwriting again. But this time, it was addressed to me. Eleanor. The words on the front sent a shiver of profound emotion through me. To be opened only if Eleanor feels threatened or pressured by family members after my death. I tore open the seal, my heart pounding in my chest. Richard's familiar script filled the page. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means my worst fears have come to pass. I've watched Victoria, Eleanor, and I've seen the way she looks at our assets, the way her patience with your hearing has dwindled. I've heard her veiled suggestions to David, even when she thought you couldn't hear. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that she would try to take advantage of your situation, perhaps even after I was gone. But you, my love, are not limited. You are not helpless. You are the strongest woman I've ever known. Your mind is sharper than any of theirs, your spirit more resilient. Your deafness is a challenge, yes, but it does not define you, nor does it diminish your capabilities. I wrote the will as I did to protect you, not just financially, but to give you the legal teeth to fight. This letter is my final instruction. If anyone, and I mean anyone, tries to force you into care you don't want, or tries to declare you incompetent, or tries to take control of the inheritance I've left you. Fight them. Fight them with everything you have. You have more strength than they realize. Use it. I love you, my brave, beautiful wife. Always. Richard. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of profound love, gratitude, and a fierce, burning resolve. Richard had known. He had prepared me, armed me, and given me permission to unleash the formidable woman he always knew I was. They thought I was helpless, oblivious. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. The knock on the door jolted me from my reverie, a quiet confirmation that the moment had arrived. Dr. Lena Kim was here. I took a deep breath, clutching Richard's letter in my hand for a moment longer, drawing strength from his unwavering belief in me. This wasn't just a consultation. It was the performance of my life, a turning point. And this time, I wasn't playing the confused, helpless widow. I was ready to take back control. I heard Victoria's bright, eager voice from downstairs as she greeted the visitor. "Dr. Kim, so glad you could make it. I'm Victoria, Eleanor's daughter-in-law." Her voice was sickly sweet, dripping with the practiced concern of a devoted caregiver. I made my way down the stairs slowly, deliberately, my movements feigning a certain fragility. My steps were hesitant, my hand trailing along the banister for support. Victoria met me at the bottom, her smile plastered on, and placed a hand on my arm, a gesture that was outwardly protective but inwardly controlling, a subtle, possessive grip. Dr. Lena Kim was a petite woman with kind, intelligent eyes that immediately seemed to take everything in. She offered me a warm, gentle smile. "Hello, Eleanor. It's lovely to meet you." She spoke slowly, clearly, her lips carefully articulated for lip reading. I simply stared blankly, tilting my head slightly, my brow furrowed as if straining to understand a sound that wasn't there. My performance was just getting started. Victoria immediately jumped in, playing her role with practiced ease. "She's been increasingly withdrawn, doctor," she explained, her voice lowered to a sympathetic murmur. "And so confused. Just this morning, she set the table for two, completely forgetting Richard was gone. It's heartbreaking. Another lie. Another calculated stroke to paint me as mentally unraveling." Dr. Kim nodded politely, her gaze flicking between Victoria and me. "Well, perhaps we can just chat for a little while," she suggested, her voice calm and reassuring. Victoria quickly positioned herself beside me, ostensibly as a support, but clearly to monitor every word, every gesture, every subtle nuance. For the next several minutes, Dr. Kim asked a series of simple questions. What day of the week was it? What year? Where were we? I kept my answers vague, my expression bewildered, often shaking my head slowly, as if the effort of comprehension was too great. Victoria, ever the helpful interpreter, was quick to provide explanations, each one subtly reinforcing the narrative of my incompetence. "She gets mixed up with dates," Victoria would interject. "Sometimes she thinks she's still living in her old house." I watched Dr. Kim carefully. Beneath her professional demeanor, I could sense a growing concern, a flicker of unease in her kind eyes. It wasn't just about my supposed condition. It was about the dynamic in the room, the way Victoria dominated the conversation, the way David sat silently, seemingly overwhelmed. Finally, Dr. Kim turned to Victoria. "Perhaps, Mrs. Matthews," she began gently, "it would be best if I had a few minutes alone with Eleanor. It's standard practice." Victoria stiffened, her smile faltering. "Oh, but doctor, Eleanor gets very anxious with strangers, and with her hearing she really needs me here to interpret. She barely understands what you're saying without me." Dr. Kim held her gaze, her voice remaining firm but diplomatic. "I understand her hearing impairment, and I'll adapt my communication style. But for these assessments, it's crucial for me to observe her independently. It often allows for a more accurate evaluation." Victoria hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining control and appearing uncooperative. The thought of challenging a medical professional in her own home, especially one she had summoned, clearly vexed her. With a tight, grudging smile, she finally relented. Very well. But I'll just be right outside the door, in case she needs me. She shot me a quick warning glance, as if to say, "Don't you dare deviate from the script." As Victoria reluctantly left the room, lingering just outside the closed door, Dr. Kim turned back to me. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a quiet, conspiratorial tone, though I could hear her perfectly. "Eleanor," she said, her eyes earnest. "Anything you say in this room is confidential. Completely confidential." She then changed her approach entirely. Instead of speaking, she pulled out her phone, opened a note app, and began to type. She showed me the screen. "Eleanor, if you understand me, please nod." I looked at the screen, then at her, and nodded slowly. She typed again. "Do you know where you are right now?" I nodded. "Do you know what month it is?" I nodded again, deliberately simple, but clear. She typed a new question, her eyes searching mine. "Are you comfortable with your current living situation?" I hesitated. This was the moment. The truth was bubbling to the surface, but I had to be careful. I looked towards the door where Victoria was undoubtedly listening. Then, slowly, deliberately, I shook my head. Dr. Kim's expression softened. She typed again, her fingers moving swiftly. "Are you afraid of your daughter-in-law?" I looked at the door, then back at the screen. The question was stark, direct. My heart pounded. This woman could either be my salvation or another pawn in Victoria's game. But Richard's letter, his trust, emboldened me. I nodded, just slightly, a subtle dip of my head. Dr. Kim typed one more message, her gaze unwavering. "Do you feel pressured to appear more confused than you actually are?" I stared at the words, at the kind, knowing eyes of Dr. Kim. This was it. The chance to break free. I met her gaze, and this time, I nodded firmly, decisively. The performance was over. The truth, finally, was beginning to emerge. "Doctor." Lena Kim's kind eyes met mine, her expression shifting from professional detachment to one of deep understanding and concern. She typed rapidly on her phone, then showed me the screen. "I need to complete this evaluation, Eleanor," the message read, "and I'll be back to you with my report. But I want you to know that you have rights. No one can force you into care you don't want. Do you understand?" I looked at her, truly seeing the empathy in her gaze, and nodded firmly, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. Finally, someone saw me. Truly saw me. Beyond the facade of my disability. A moment later, Victoria re-entered the room, her forced smile back in place, though a flicker of impatience danced in her eyes. Dr. Kim's demeanor was now professional but noticeably cooler. Victoria, eager for immediate validation, quickly asked for a preliminary assessment. "So, doctor, what's your initial impression? Is it as bad as we thought?" Dr. Kim met her gaze directly. "Mrs. Matthews, I've concluded my initial assessment. I need to review my notes and prepare a formal report. I will communicate my findings to the referring physician and, with Eleanor's consent, to the family, in due course." Her tone was polite but unyielding. She offered me a few brochures for local support groups and legal aid services for seniors, her eyes conveying a silent message of reassurance. Then, with a polite nod, she left, leaving Victoria standing in the living room, seething with frustration at the lack of immediate confirmation for her schemes. I knew then that I couldn't wait for Dr. Kim's report to be formally issued. Victoria's machinations were moving too quickly. I had to take control. Now. The next morning, after Victoria left for her regular yoga class and David departed for work, I took action. With a steady hand, I called a taxi, giving the driver the address for Robert Bob Davis's law office. Bob Davis looked up from his desk, genuinely surprised to see me, alone and unescorted, walk into his office. He rose, a question forming on his lips, but before he could mouth the words, I sat down in the client chair opposite him, and for the first time in weeks, my voice, clear and strong, filled the room. "Mr. Davis," I said, meeting his startled gaze, "I need your help." And I need you to know that I can hear perfectly well." His jaw dropped. He blinked, speechless for a moment, then slowly sank back into his chair. "Eleanor. Mrs. Matthews. What?" I didn't wait for him to process. I explained everything. The freak accident 5 years ago. The trauma to my inner ear. The long, silent years. Then, the strange sensations 3 months ago. The experimental surgery. And the miraculous return of my hearing. Just weeks before Richard's death, I told him about Richard's secret will, his incredible foresight, and then, I laid bare Victoria's ruthless manipulation, the forced move into my own home, the systematic attempts to declare me incompetent and seize my inheritance. I spoke with a calm, unwavering clarity that left no room for doubt. Bob Davis listened, his initial shock giving way to a look of growing alarm. "Eleanor," he said, his voice grave, "this isn't just family disagreement. This is potentially elder abuse and financial exploitation. Do you have any proof of these claims?" "I do," I replied, pulling the digital recorder from my purse. "I've been recording key conversations, Victoria's calls to Dr. Kelly, her discussions with David, her plans with Brenda. It's all here." I played snippets for him, the chilling clarity of Victoria's voice filling the quiet office, detailing her plans to institutionalize me, sell my house, and use my money for her own purposes. Bob Davis's face darkened with each playback. He slowly shook his head, a look of disgust on his face. "This is damning, Eleanor. Truly damning." I leaned forward, my resolve hardening. "I want them out of my house, Mr. Davis. I want to reclaim my independence, and I want them to face the consequences of their actions." He looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Eleanor, this will be a direct confrontation with your son, David. Are you ready for that?" "I'm ready," I said, my voice firm. Richard prepared me for this. He knew. We spent the next 2 hours planning. Bob Davis assured me he would immediately prepare the necessary documentation, affirming my competency, citing the specific language in Richard's will and my own testimony. He would also draft a formal eviction notice for Victoria and David, giving them 30 days to vacate my home. That evening, as I sat alone in the living room that was slowly being purged of Victoria's intrusions, my phone rang. It was Dr. Lena Kim. "Eleanor," she said, her voice warm and reassuring. "I've finalized my report. I found no evidence of cognitive impairment or incompetency. In fact, your cognitive functions are well within the normal range for your age. I also noted some serious concerns about the pressure being placed on you by your family members, and I've documented that in my report." A wave of relief washed over me. Another piece of the puzzle was falling into place. The next evening, I waited for David in the living room. When he arrived, his shoulders slumped from a long day at work. I rose to meet him. "It was very enlightening, David," I began, my voice clear and even. "We need to talk." He looked at me, confused. "About what, Mom? Are you feeling all right?" "I am feeling perfectly all right," I corrected him, my voice still calm, but with an underlying steel. "And for the first time in 5 years, I'm hearing perfectly all right too." His eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. Just then, Victoria, drawn by the unusual sound of my speaking voice, rushed into the room, her face pale. "What's going on?" she demanded, then her gaze fixed on me. "You're deaf. You've been deaf for 5 years, she whispered, a desperate plea for the world to conform to her lies. "I was deaf," I corrected her, my voice rising slightly. "For 5 long years. But I had surgery 3 months ago, just before your father died. It was the wisest decision we ever made." I then pressed play on the digital recorder, and the room was filled with Victoria's own voice. Her chilling plans to institutionalize me, to sell my house, to use my inheritance for fertility treatments in their own home. David listened, his face contorting in horror, his gaze fixed on Victoria, a dawning realization of her true nature. Victoria, meanwhile, stammered, It's out of context. You don't understand." I stopped the recording. "I understand perfectly, Victoria. and so does Dr. Lena Kim. I presented them with Dr. Kim's report, the official document affirming my competency and noting the troubling family dynamics. My voice, now resonating with the full force of my regained power, left no room for argument. You have 1 hour to pack your essential belongings and leave this house. If you are not gone by then, Mr. Davis will be serving you with an eviction notice. And David, your inheritance will be reduced to $1, as per your father's wishes. The choice is yours. They stared at me, dumbfounded, their carefully constructed world shattered around them. They had underestimated me, the deaf widow they thought they could exploit, but Richard had given me the tools, and I had used them. In the end, Victoria and David left, their faces a mixture of fury and shock. The house, my home, was mine again. I sold it a few months later, choosing to move to San Diego, a place Richard and I had always dreamed of retiring. With Richard's love as my guide and his wisdom as my shield, I rebuilt my life, stronger, wiser, and more independent than I had ever been before. My voice, once silenced, was now free to sing.